Robotech.
Listen up, because in 1985, Robotech wasn't just another anime import. This show was airing in 85 markets across the United States, pulling ratings that rivaled network Saturday morning cartoons and introducing an entire generation of American kids.
Attention! Robotech has returned!
To serialized storytelling, giant transforming robots, and the concept that main characters could actually die. The show ran for 85 episodes, spawned novels, comics, toy lines, and created a fan base so dedicated that they're still arguing about it 40 years later. At its peak, Robotech was the gateway drug that turned casual cartoon watchers into hardcore anime fans. But here's the thing, Robotech wasn't actually one show. It was 3 completely unrelated Japanese anime series Frankenstein together through creative dubbing and rewriting. And by 1986, it was over. No second season of new content, no continuation, just 85 episodes and then nothing. So what the hell happened? How did a show cobbled together from spare parts become one of the most influential anime imports in American history? And why couldn't it sustain itself beyond that initial 85-episode run? Look, if you grew up in the mid-80s, you remember racing home to catch Robotech after school. You remember Rick Hunter and Lisa Hayes and the love triangle with Min-May. You remember being genuinely shocked when Roy Fokker died. You remember the Zentradi and the Invid and those transforming Veritech fighters. Look, I went deep on this one. Tracked down production records, licensing deals, and the original Japanese source material to understand how this bizarre experiment actually worked. And man, it's wild. We're talking about cultural translation as creative rewriting, about how limitations forced innovation, and about a franchise that changed American anime fandom forever, but couldn't survive its own origin story. So buckle up, because this is about how you make a coherent 85-episode series out of 3 completely different shows that have nothing to do with each other. How Harmony Gold created Robotech. Alright, so here's something most people don't realize. Robotech exists because of a licensing accident and syndication math. In 1984, a company called Harmony Gold was looking for anime to import to the United States. They'd had some success with international distribution, and they saw opportunity in the Japanese animation market. Specifically, they wanted to license a show called Super Dimension Fortress Macross. Macross was a 36-episode series that had aired in Japan in 1982 to 83. It was about transforming fighter jets, giant alien invaders, and a love triangle. It was sophisticated, serialized, and featured actual character death and war consequences. Perfect for the American market, right? Except there was a problem. American syndication required 65 episodes minimum. That was the magic number. 65 episodes meant you could strip a show across weekdays for 13 weeks, then start over. Anything less than 65 episodes wasn't viable for syndication. Macross only had 36 episodes. That's barely half of what they needed. So Harmony Gold's producer, Carl Makek, had a crazy idea. What if we licensed 2 more Japanese shows with similar themes? Giant robots, space warfare, mecha designs, and edit them together into one continuous story? What if we just pretend they're all the same series? The shows he picked were Super Dimension Cavalry Southern Cross, 23 episodes, and Genesis Climber Mospiata, 25 episodes. Combined with Macross's 36 episodes, that gave them 84 episodes. Close enough to 65 for syndication, and actually better because it was more content. Now, here's the insane part. These 3 shows had nothing to do with each other. They were made by different studios, in different years, with completely different stories, characters, and art styles. Macross was about transforming jets, fighting giant aliens. Southern Cross was about hover tanks, fighting android invaders. Mospiata was about motorcycles that turned into armor fighting different aliens. Carl Makek's solution? Rewrite everything. Create a completely new storyline that connected all 3 series. Change character names, relationships, and motivations. Invent backstory that didn't exist. make it all one continuous generational saga. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. They hired screenwriters to create entirely new dialogue. They brought in Gregory Snegoff to do voice direction and script adaptation. They composed new music. That iconic Robotech theme by Ulpio Minucci, that's nothing like the original Japanese scores. The framing device was brilliant. The Macross saga covered the first alien war. The Masters saga, Southern Cross, was the second generation dealing with the aftermath. The new generation, Mos Beata, was decades later, Earth occupied by a third alien force. Robotech premiered in March 1985 in syndication, and within weeks, it was pulling ratings that shocked everyone. Kids weren't just watching, they were hooked. This was serialized storytelling on a level American cartoons weren't doing. Characters developed across episodes. Relationships evolved. People died and stayed dead. Roy Fokker's death in episode 18 traumatized an entire generation of kids. This wasn't like G.I. Joe, where pilots always parachuted out safely. Roy died bleeding out in his apartment while trying to get to his girlfriend. Kids watching after school were not prepared for that. And the love triangle between Rick, Lisa, and Minmay was actual romantic drama with stakes and consequences. It played out across 36 episodes with genuine emotional complexity. American cartoons in 1985 didn't do that. By mid-1985, Robotech was airing in 85 markets nationwide. Matchbox had the toy license and was producing Veritech fighters and Destroyed figures. Comico was publishing comics that expanded the story. The show was generating millions in merchandise, but there were massive problems lurking beneath the surface. Problems that would prevent Robotech from ever becoming the sustainable franchise it should have been. They were completely dependent on Japanese source material they didn't control. Here's the fatal flaw that killed Robotech's long-term prospects. Harmony Gold didn't own any of the content. They'd licensed Macross, Southern Cross, and Mos Beata from their respective Japanese studios. But those licenses were limited. They had rights to adapt the existing episodes, but they didn't have rights to create new Japanese animation based on those properties. And the Japanese studios weren't making more episodes. Macross was done. Southern Cross had been canceled in Japan due to poor ratings. Mos Beata was finished. There was no more source material to adapt. So when Robotech finished its 85-episode run in 1986, Harmony Gold had nothing. They couldn't just order more episodes from Japan. The studios had moved on to other projects. And even if they wanted to make more, the licensing agreements were complicated and expensive. Harmony Gold tried to produce a sequel series called Robotech 2: The Sentinels. They partnered with Tatsunoko Production in Japan to create new animation. They got 3 episodes into production, and the partnership collapsed. The US dollar crashed against the yen in 1986, making Japanese animation production suddenly 40% more expensive for American companies. The Sentinels was canceled mid-production after spending over $500,000 on just 3 episodes. That failure taught Harmony Gold a brutal lesson. They couldn't afford to produce new Robotech animation at Japanese quality levels. The economics didn't work. Compare that to shows like Transformers and G.I. Joe, which were owned by American companies that controlled the entire production pipeline. Hasbro could commission new seasons whenever they wanted. They could pivot to new toy lines and adjust the show accordingly. Robotech couldn't do any of that. They were perpetually stuck, licensing content they didn't control from studios that weren't making more of it. The Frankenstein assembly created sustainability problems. Here's the problem with building a franchise out of 3 unrelated shows. You inherit all their problems and limitations. The Macross saga was beloved. Those first 36 episodes were tight, compelling, emotionally resonant. The animation was good. The story was coherent. Fans adored it. The Masters saga? Much weaker. Southern Cross had been canceled in Japan for a reason. The story was confusing, the characters less compelling, and the animation quality was noticeably worse than Macross. Even Carl Mackek's rewriting couldn't fully fix the underlying problems with the source material. The new generation was better than Masters, but still not as good as Macross. And it had a completely different tone, darker, more post-apocalyptic, less hopeful. So Robotech's quality was wildly inconsistent across its 85 episodes. The first third was great, the middle third was rough, the final third was decent, but different. That inconsistency made it hard to maintain audience enthusiasm. Kids who fell in love with Rick Hunter and the Macross saga had to sit through 23 episodes of the Masters saga with completely new characters and a different aesthetic before getting to the new generation, which was again completely different. Some fans stuck with it, many didn't. By the time the new generation was airing, ratings had dropped significantly from the Macross saga peak. And here's the bigger problem. The Frankenstein assembly meant Robotech's identity was always unstable. Was it a war story? A romance? A post-apocalyptic resistance tale? It was all three, but that made it hard to market, hard to explain, and hard to expand. When Harmony Gold tried to develop new Robotech content, they constantly struggled with which Robotech? Do you continue the new generation timeline? Do you go back to Macross characters? Do you create something entirely new? That identity crisis plagued every Robotech project that followed. The novels went one direction, the comics went another. The attempted sequel series went a third way. There was no coherent vision because the source material was inherently incoherent. The legal nightmare that never ended. This is the part that still affects Robotech today, 40 years later. When Harmony Gold licensed Macross, Southern Cross, and Mospiata, they were dealing with multiple Japanese studios and rights holders. And those licensing agreements were complicated. In Japan, Macross was owned by Studio Nue and Big West, but Harmony Gold had licensed it through Tatsunoko Production, which had distribution rights. So the question became, did Harmony Gold's license actually give them full rights to Macross, or just distribution rights to the specific episodes they'd adapted? That legal ambiguity exploded in the 2000s when Big West started claiming Harmony Gold didn't have rights to create new Macross content. Multiple lawsuits followed. International distribution became a nightmare because different territories had different rights situations. The result? Harmony Gold couldn't easily produce new Robotech content featuring Macross characters without risking legal challenges. And Macross was the popular part. That's what fans wanted more of. Meanwhile, Big West continued making new Macross series in Japan, Macross Plus, Macross 7, Macross Frontier, that couldn't be officially released in many Western markets because of the Harmony Gold rights dispute. So you had this bizarre situation where Macross content was being made and was successful in Japan, but American Robotech fans couldn't access it, and Harmony Gold couldn't make their own new Macross-based Robotech content without legal risk. This legal quagmire meant Robotech was essentially frozen. They had this valuable property that fans loved, but they couldn't effectively expand it because the underlying rights were a mess. Every attempted Robotech revival since the 80s has had to navigate this legal minefield. The 2006 Robotech: The Shadow Chronicles carefully avoided using Macross designs. The various proposed live-action films kept getting delayed, partly because of rights issues. It's a franchise permanently crippled by its origin story. When creative brilliance meets structural impossibility. So here's the thing about Robotech. What Carl Macek and his team did was genuinely brilliant. They took 3 unrelated shows and created a coherent 85-episode saga that introduced American audiences to sophisticated serialized anime storytelling. They proved American kids would watch shows with ongoing storylines, character depth, romantic complexity, and war consequences. They opened the door for every anime import that followed. Without Robotech's success, shows like Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and Pokémon might not have gotten US distribution deals. Robotech changed American anime fandom forever. It created a generation of fans who went seeking out the original Japanese versions, who started learning about anime as a distinct medium, who built the foundation for the anime industry in America. But the brilliance of the adaptation couldn't overcome the structural problems baked into its creation. You can't build a sustainable franchise on borrowed content you don't control. You can't create narrative coherence from fundamentally incompatible source material. You can't expand a universe when the legal rights are a tangled nightmare. Robotech succeeded as a one-time adaptation. It failed as a sustainable franchise. And that's the tragedy. This should have been the foundation of a decades-spanning saga with multiple series, films, and expanded universe content. The fan demand was there. The cultural impact was real. But the business realities, licensing limitations, legal disputes, dependency on source material, made it impossible. Robotech is a case study in how creative success doesn't guarantee business sustainability, how sometimes the thing that makes a property successful is also what prevents it from lasting. So that's the rise and fall of Robotech, an 85-episode Frankenstein creation that shouldn't have worked but did, that changed American anime fandom forever, and that could never sustain itself because of how it was built. It's a story about creative ingenuity working within impossible constraints, about how sometimes the most influential work is also the most fragile, about how legal and business structures can strangle even the most beloved franchises. Robotech proved serialized anime storytelling could work in America. Then it proved that success built on borrowed foundations can't last. The 85 episodes will live forever as a landmark in American animation history. But Robotech will always be the franchise that could have been so much more if the pieces had fit together differently. If Roy Fokker's death traumatized you as a kid, you're my people. Drop a comment and tell me which saga was your favorite, Macross, Masters, or New Generation. Mine was Macross, obviously, but I respect the New Generation fans. And if you're not subscribed yet, there's a lot more animation history where this came from.